Welcome back, everyone, to Show Prep Part 3 with AJ Sims. What's going on, AJ?
What's up, Kurt? Glad to be back, man. Thank you, everybody, for your phenomenal feedback. And it's just been encouraging to me and Kurt that people have really been enjoying this series of contest prep and deep diving into strategies and methodologies and how to apply specific things and creating the best looking physique on show day and thereafter as well.
Yeah, so we were going to dive into now Part 3, which is like the week out, right? Yep. 2 weeks out, peak week. And then what we do is a rebound, I guess, depending if there's another show coming up or if they're just going into the rough season or health phase or whatever, right? What the rough. I think we're probably not going to get super detailed with the exact peak week stuff because this should not be taken as personal advice, right? Yep. Like if someone really is peaking for a show and they're confused as how to do this, they should really reach out to a coach.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I don't think that one size shoe fits all. You know, your mileage may vary. Like I've been saying, it's, really going to depend on how you're looking day to day, hour to hour leading into the show. Did you get all the fat off? Is going to be first and foremost above all else. Did you manage estrogen correctly? Did you reduce systemic inflammation? Is cortisol being controlled? Aldosterone being controlled? So all those cofactors going in. So if you have done all that and you've done your homework, I know me and Kurt as a coach, we will dial the client in. I know if that is not happening, we will tell them to just pick another show 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road, just being honest and transparent. And, that could be due to many different reasons. But I think at the end of the day, if you're not ready and you do have a coach, the coach should absolutely be totally honest and transparent with you, not sugarcoat it.
Yeah. And on for many different levels, right? It's not a good look for the athlete. It's not a good look for the coach. It's not a good look for the judges. The judges don't appreciate when someone is not in condition, even at the amateur level. It's not. Absolutely. They don't really take that stuff as a joke. And the people pay a lot of money to come watch these shows. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many NPC shows I've been to where half the guys are in horrible condition.
Yeah,
and you spend $150 to watch this stuff, and it's kind of a joke. Even and I'm not ripping on anyone, but even the Arnold Classic in Ohio this year, the amateur show, was some of the most unimpressive stuff I've ever seen on a stage. The conditioning was atrocious. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with this current thing with the guys running their estrogen super high and just not getting lean enough. Yeah, but who knows? We were actually in Ohio for the Arnold, and we're watching it the day before.
Okay,
and it was like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Kurt. I think on top of that too, and listen, there is we're getting more and more data, not only as athletes, but as coaches, as individuals as a whole, from a physiological standpoint, how the body works, how it adapts. Kurt, obviously being from the medical background, has a very deep dive knowledge into that. But one word that is going around, it's a hot button word, and there is definitely truth to a specific amount of fatigue that the body can respond to, whether that be your minimum recovery volume, maximum recovery volume when it comes to training, whether that be how far can you get into a deficit without pushing over the edge to be burning off tissue and getting into a catabolic state. But on the same token, I think that using the word fatigue too much, too often, will hinder the athlete from actually pushing themselves to get to the levels of body fat they need to, because they think the second they start feeling tired is the time to start pulling back. And that is not the case, because we are talking about an extreme sport with extreme levels of low body fat. There's going to be many times throughout the process that you do not feel well. I am not advocating for you overexerting yourself to the extent. Again, it's a fine balance. But bodybuilding is like pushing that fine line to achieve that look on show day. It's only for a specific period of time. So I do think that there is something to social media being a gift and a curse, like we've talked about in the past, Kurt, that there is so much information out there. It's almost too much to an extent, puts people into an analysis paralysis. And like, man, I'm tired after the second day of low carbs. I think I just need to do a refeed or a cheat meal, no cardio, and we'll see how it goes. And what that does is I believe it puts you into a psychological negative effect where you're just constantly almost erring on the side of caution, where you're babying yourself to an extent, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And guys they'll start to pull back even if their strength goes down. Like, no, their leg press will drop by 45 pounds or something, and they'll start to get nervous and they'll think they need a refeed. That's normal. You're not going to stay as strong all the way through. It never happens.
No.
Right. And this isn't the judges don't care how strong you are. They don't know what you weigh. They just care what you look like. That's all we care about. And we're not advocating that people push themselves into a dangerous place, but it is very uncomfortable. It needs to be uncomfortable for a period of time to get that lean. Everyone has a different tolerance for this amount of suffering. Right.
Yep.
The truly successful guys kind of thrive on this odd, deep place. And others don't. And those are not typically the ones that make it very far in bodybuilding.
No, 100%. I mean, I can use myself as an example, and I never was a phenomenal competitor by any standard whatsoever. Was known for my conditioning, but I guess I would pinpoint it to the mindset. And I was 17 years old, living in Las Vegas. I just competed at the Teenage Nationals, which I had trained 2.5 years for. I took 2.5 years just to get ready for that show. I did a show at 14 and a half. And then by the time I was 17 and a half, I put on 33 pounds of stage weight, I believe, in between. Now I started a cycle at 17, just fully transparent with testosterone, because my goal obviously back then was to get to the Mr. Olympia. So by all means necessary, I did what I needed to. But I remember the day after the show, I got 6th or 7th, and I went into the show with Cutler being in my corner, backing me. So there was hype involved. I had just signed with Muscle Tech, so I was obviously disappointed. But I do remember the next day sitting in the hotel lobby at the Sheraton Station Square in Pittsburgh and eating with my parents and a couple competitors that were a little older than me. And they were all pigging out, and I was eating oatmeal and egg whites. And I put Splenda on my oatmeal. And I said, this is a treat for me because I haven't had a packet of Splenda in 20 weeks. Now, regardless of if it makes a difference or not, what I'm talking about is the psychological aspect of what it takes, which me and Kurt kind of wanted to touch on when it comes to prep. What is the psychological standpoint that it takes not only to get to the show, compete at the show, and then after the show, where do you need to be psychologically and mentally to be focused on what you're doing?
I mean, I think I would start with the goal is to win, right? There should never be another thought in your mind. That's the way I communicate to my athletes as well. Because I phrase everything as after you win this, we move on from there. We don't go in things not to win.
Absolutely.
That doesn't always happen, right? Like I'm similar to you, though you got farther than me. I'm not a fantastic athlete myself. I sure can suffer though.
Yeah.
And I continue to do so now at 50. I enjoy that process still. Like you, I think you and I are the only two insane people that still do that. Yeah. Outside of competition. But I think that there's something to be said about it. It really puts you in touch with what matters. And I think in focus, right? Like my brain is a lot sharper when I'm leaner and I'm hungry.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. 100%. And I think that may be the case for everybody. I mean, I think when you're at a very high surplus of food, constantly and just almost overfilled to an extent, right? Which could throw off, maybe lipids to an extent, or hemoglobin A1C, glucose levels from an acute standpoint, and you're just stuffed all the time. You're not as sharp. You're not as cognitively enhanced. You can't sleep as good. So there is a cognitive enhancement and sharpness and focus. That's why I think me and Kurt do this, because we do need to perform on the highest level, not only for our clients, but our families and for ourselves. I mean, I think there's a certain expectation we both have being a type A personality. We enjoy it. I know I've talked to Kurt many times. We actually like the feeling of being hungry. And what I try to tell my clients, and I know you do too, Kurt, is when you get in that state of not feeling satiated, you need to embrace that and actually tell yourself, this is enjoyable. Because when you shift your mindset, you're actually able to train your brain to think differently about when things get hard. It's building mental resiliency. I talk about it all the time. When you're on the stair mill or the incline treadmill, visualizing the end result of what you look like on show day. I always tell my guys this. I've used this line for over a decade. You're going to be one of two people backstage. You're either going to be one of the persons that looks around at everybody and says, man, I wish I wouldn't have cheated on my diet. I wish I would have done that extra minute of cardio. I wish the day I was really, really tired, I didn't slow down. Or you're going to sit back with a smile on your face, not looking at anybody because you really don't need to. You know that you dialed it in and you're right on the money. And you tell yourself, I did everything. I checked every box every day. And now it's my time to present it on stage. And not only is that going to give you a lot more confidence on stage, from a physiological standpoint, neurological, you're going to be in a more parasympathetic rest and digest state and not get into the fight or flight that's going to cause a glucose dip, sweating on stage. vasoconstriction, all the things that happen when you go into a sympathetic fight or flight state, so it's keeping your body much more in tune with performing on stage better, because you are performing on stage.
Yeah. And like you said, every professional athlete that I know does it as well. You visualize yourself winning. It's very important to picture yourself. I did it for years, also looking at other people's physiques. I know I started years ago. I started by looking at Frank Zane physique, and I would imagine myself until I look like him. Right. And then you progress through these things. You stare at these images until you can accomplish those things. I think it's very important. Your brain has to be there, and you can't question yourself. There's no reason why you can't get there. There's no reason why anyone can't get there. That's in our head.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to the point of a contest prep that's so hard in your body, it's really hard to sit on the toilet. I remember getting up and, having to use the restroom, and it's like you literally have to talk yourself into getting off the couch and trying to use the restroom. That's when you're at the deepest, darkest, hardest parts of prep. Man, if your brain from a psychological standpoint is where it needs to be, your mind will carry your body. Yeah, it will carry your body. And gratitude, anyone that follows me knows that I talk about this all the time. Starting the day off grateful, not saying I have to go do cardio, but I get to do cardio, or not saying I have to do low carbs, saying I get to even eat food or drink clean water. Like, we take a lot of things in this country for granted, or any country that has accessible clean water and food. But if you shift your perspective, man, it makes a huge, I wish someone would have told me this when I was 22 years old, getting ready for shows, because I remember being in a state of negativity and complacency and complaining. And really what that did was made the process that much harder on me, because my mind was really telling my body, this is horrible. Why are you doing this? When rather you have gratitude, you are getting somewhat of you could call it a placebo effect or a nocebo effect, and that there's clinical data that will back that up, telling your body that you can do this and that you're actually enjoying doing this. So
no, there's tons of evidence to show that with placebo effect. The end of the day, we choose to do this, right? Food is abundant. Like, for most of us that we work with, right, food is relatively abundant. This is a choice. You can stop at any point, versus someone who is truly starving to death. That's not a choice. Yes. So this is a sport, and it's a decision we made to participate in that sport. So there is a suck, but you have to embrace that suck, and you have to embrace it for a while.
That's powerful, Kurt. That's awesome, man. If anyone gets anything out of this podcast, I'd take the last 5 minutes of what we just talked about. I think that is going to be a game changer for the athletes, because I know the majority of people, they struggle with that issue. Yeah.
Well, and even my lifestyle guys, I think there's some that are totally fine with it. I have a couple guys that they're like us. They enjoy that process. Yep. I think you just need to learn how to do it. And just do it well and just repeat it. And it's not a short-term thing. It's generally long. Like you and I also talked about, it's not like for a season, for a specific thing. You kind of live like that. I live like that as well. I don't really ever get out of shape.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. My weight may go up a little bit, but I by all means, I would never be considered out of shape by anyone.
100% lifestyle. So we took some notes, brother, before we did this, and we were talking about, because we were taking some of the comments people were leaving. They were interested in, what do you do if you have 2 or 3 shows back to back? Yep. Post-show rebound. What does that look like from a health standpoint? Blood markers, like blood work. What are we looking for? How do we get the body feeling, back to somewhat normality right after the show, right? To return back to homeostasis, where energy levels are back up. We're balancing maybe estrogen a little bit back up if we did tank it. Just for the benefit of getting as dry as possible on show day. So I'll let you go ahead and, kind of dive into that.
I was just going to touch on the estrogen thing first, because this has been like a really hot thing.
Hot topic right now, man.
Clarify this, because the newest research shows, so estrogen outside of show prep, estrogen within range is where you should be. You should not be above, you should not be below. We're not advocating crushing it outside of show prep. We're not advocating running it high.
Absolutely.
Estrogen, similar to growth hormone, is what you call sexually dimorphic. It is different in men and women. It has different effects. It's not the same. It is similar. In a man's body, estrogen is not anabolic. The only effect outside of glycogen storage that it plays in a man is mitochondria. So it'll help you create more energy within the muscles, but it also acts as an anti-decoupler. So in theory, it's technically going to slow your metabolism down to some degree. How much? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. I don't want to dwell on it, but so guys get really hung up on this estrogen. It is not an anabolic hormone in men. So don't be worrying about running it at, 80. 80 is not good. Okay. So,
let me just, I just want to kind of touch on that too. I will tell you from a lifestyle standpoint, obviously that's what we do. And me being on, transparency on TRT, on prescribed TRT, I found my estrogen ratio when it's pulled on labs, when it's around 30 to 33, right around there. That is when I feel my most optimal. Obviously, if it starts getting a little lower, I start feeling the side effects. If I get higher, and I've tried this, I went down the rabbit hole 3 or 4 years ago of trying to, add in TRT add to TRT, sorry, with Masteron or Primobolan. It did not control my estrogen. I felt worse on it, and my estrogen went up to 80 to 90, and I looked worse. My blood pressure was higher. I became more insulin resistant. My sleep was garbage. Libido was horrible. So I just wanted to really touch on that from an anecdotal standpoint. I actually I tried it.
So, I think we've all tried it to see what happens, and it's just, but that's what the current science is. I'm sorry if guys, it's not an individual thing and it's not an opinion thing. Unfortunately, the science does not line up there. It is not anabolic in humans. So prep week, peak week, we could talk real fast about. So basically assuming the athlete is in shape, right? They're truly fat free. Peak week is not the time to be losing fat. That should be done at least a week before that, if not 2 or 3 weeks before that, depending on the athlete and their capabilities. I would love to see someone ready early and then start to bring the food up, right? So like you said, they go into the show in more of a rest and digest phase. They're not so stressed out. Really peak week for me is about depletion, refilling them, and fine tuning some minerals and perhaps some water. I don't personally drop water altogether. I think that's dangerous. I've never really found a benefit to that. That generally will just result in your muscles losing water.
Agreed.
And risking, obviously health issues on stage, right? I don't know at pro level shows if they still do this, but at NPC shows, if you pass out, you're done. They will yank you out of the show.
I'm pretty sure they've started getting to those standards because guys have pushed it to a dangerous level, and I don't either. People will use the terminology dropping water, and I've heard people that what they try to do is they come up with a protocol where they will hyperload water maybe a day before the show, and they'll basically take in a gallon or two till noon, and then just totally shut it off, and hopefully with all the variables that play into going to tan, athletes meeting, back and forth into Ubers. If you're out of town, you're out of your environment, and you may be shutting down the body's ability to even process that urine through the kidneys like it normally would, just because you are in a stressful situation. So that is a big risk. I never cut water. I may reduce it, and then we may control it meal by meal. And I may even have people take in fluid, throughout the night into show day based off their urination level, the color of the urine, what's going on with vascularity, what's going on with just the feel of the muscle. We've talked on this before too. So just like you said, we're balancing the mineral electrolytes, we're balancing the water intake to the carbohydrate ratio. But really, to touch on what Kurt said, I mean, the last week really is all about the fine tuning, the small details, which you should have enough data during the whole process that you pretty much know what's going to happen. Somebody's peak ceiling for carbohydrate intake into the glycogen, what they can handle, and really finding out the psychology of that person. Are they a neurotic overthinker where they try to overanalyze everything? They're going to look at their pictures every 5 minutes and say, 1 minute they look great, the next minute they look in the mirror, they lost 2 veins, so now they're flat. Or are you dealing with someone calm, cool, collected? Then you have to approach those preps in 2 different manners the last week, So really it's all about fine tuning, where I will essentially, there's many different routes you can go, right? So you can do just a small titration every single day leading into the show of macronutrients, the majority being from carbohydrates to fill up muscle glycogen. Or you can go into a front load and then tapering it back down, or you could go into a moderate load in the middle of the week or at the end of the week. And again, you'll know this by the data you've collected during the entire process and prep. If you have a coach like Kurt or myself, the coach is monitoring you every single day throughout the day. They're taking all this data, they're collecting it based off your appearance, based off of using weight as a small gauge, and based off all those other biofeedbacks, where it's almost becomes like the matrix to us, like an algorithm that we can read that you don't maybe understand, but that's the coach's job, is for you not to fully grasp it, right? We take the thinking and the guessing out and we do the work for you. And if you're prepping yourself, and there's some guys that are decently good at this, very difficult though. I believe that when you've come out of an emotional prep and all your neurotransmitters are screwed at that point, to really be able to fully assess yourself and, do due diligence of being honest with the way you look. So always having a second pair of eyes that actually knows what they're talking about.
Yep.
The cool thing is if, people are utilizing their wives or significant other, I would only do that if you have a significant other that is absolutely brutally honest with you.
Yeah, you don't need sugar-coated. But in theory, even backing up to the week before with the peak week, it's just a fine-tuning thing. In theory, not that you would necessarily do it, you could technically enter the show the week before, and you should do pretty similar. You're just tweaking that look a little bit. If you're not good enough the Sunday a week out, you're not good enough.
I tell guys that all the time. Yeah, I tell guys that all the time. Honestly, you should be at a point 10 days out where you're waking up. You could slap on Tanner and just get on stage like that.
And you should at least place well.
Exactly. So that just shows us that we can just get a little bit better. Yeah. If you get greedy, if you try to get too greedy the final week, you will overshoot.
Yep.
And you will make yourself 50% worse instead of 5% better.
Yep. And you see that even at the pro level. There's a bunch of people that fill and spill
all the time,
right? And then try to clean it up with things like, diuretics after the fact. And it generally doesn't work. And you can see it in their look that it's soft and, kind of wet looking.
So people they're obviously going to ask, they're going to say, okay, so we understand, there's a simplified version that you guys are kind of directing into, because there's people that have written books, right, on how to peak yourself, right, become your own coach. And there's valuable information in that for sure, but everything's individualistic and the scenarios are going to vary from show to show. If I take someone that I've had in the past at a New York Pro to an Olympia, they know the stakes are higher. Therefore, anxiety and stress is absolutely going to be higher. You have to mitigate cortisol and stress as much as possible and get the person out of that fight or flight state. So we've talked about, Kurt, a few things. People are using magnesium, rhodiola rosea. They're using ashwagandha. They're using relora, medicinal adaptogen mushrooms. There's certain things you can utilize to really be able to benefit taking the stress levels down. I mean, I'm even big on using Benadryl the last couple of nights before. It's really fantastic to calm that stress and anxiety. It's very, very useful for that. Also for a good night's rest as well. So sleeping,
taking a nap or even help.
Oh man, sleeping. I can't even stress it enough, man. I will tell my guys the last couple of days, listen, if you could sleep 10 to 12 hours, literally do what it takes to sleep 10 to 12 hours, because the difference in a physique from, let's say, 2 weeks prior where they're averaging 6 or 7 or maybe 5 to 10. I mean, dude, it is night and day. I mean, they wake up and they're like, what just happened? And I'm like, you slept and you dried out and the body lowered its cortisol and inflammation, systemic inflammation went away. It's an amazing thing, man. Sleep is your best friend.
So some of the little things, again, these are all individual things. Some of the little things I would do. So we pull injectables week out, right? You can have mishaps with injections. We can do a whole video on that. And even the best person with this stuff can have a mishap. You can have an infection. You could have some inflammation. You could hit a vein. It's a mess. You want to pull them out as fast, week out. Protein typically would lower it, right? Peak week, you don't need as much. You're not gaining any muscle at that point. 100 grams is most likely plenty to hold your muscle mass. You still have some anabolic load in there. Orals probably go up depending what, like if you're using Winistrol, perhaps it's titrated up depending on the person with the look you're going for. Or if things like Halo are used, perhaps that's going up as well. I don't want to talk about specific doses or
let me just ask you this, Kurt. Why would let's not mention a dosage like you said, but why would people push against Winistrol not going up the final week? I mean, the mechanisms, knowing how it works, right? Knowing how it works, we know how it works. But could you explain to people, I mean, what's going on from a physiological standpoint? What's the benefit and why is there pushback on this? I mean, the
pushback, I mean, you and I both see this now. They think there's pushback on everything, right? Like what you and I are talking about now is stuff that's been done consistently and successfully for at least 20 years. This has not changed. It's changed in a lot of coaches' eyes and competitors' eyes, right? Like I see people's cycles all the time going into shows and it doesn't look anything like what I would recommend, right? Like 250 milligrams of testosterone and 1,000 milligrams of masteron, right? And no 19-nor, or like, it's just, to me, it's very bizarre where people are going, no AI. I think the pushback with things like Winistrol is people look at it like it's liver toxic, but yet at this point, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? At this point in prep, health is risky, right? We are pushing this metric. It's why you don't use orals typically in the off season if you can avoid it, right? Because you don't need to risk that. And the funny thing is, I a lot of times see people's blood markers improve during prep because they get leaner. So even though you would think when you look at the drugs, you're like, oh, tren and mastron and crushing estrogen and all these things, and the markers be atrocious. You look at it, and a lot of times it's actually improved what it was in the off season when the blood pressure is higher and they're fatter and they sit more. If you do cardio, many hours a week during prep, and your body fat's really low, and you're eating really healthy, clean food, and you're digesting well, and you're drinking adequate water, and you're getting, if you can get sleep, your blood should generally be improved. So in theory, it would be a safer time to push Winistrol. So the reason why Winistrol would be used is it blocks something called, there's a protein called C2. It's an inhibitor, and that pulls water out from under the skin. That's why it's FDA approved now for something called chronic angioedema, which is a life-threatening situation. It's really the only FDA use for Winistrol at the moment. And we're basically just reaping the benefits of that effect. So it's creating a harder, drier look. If you're fat, it's not going to make a difference. You take all the Winistrol in the world you want, it's not going to make you look dry and hard. But if you're in the low single digits of body fat, it's what will bring out those striations, right? On your quads, on your triceps, all those sorts of things. And it still gives you some level of needed aggression, needed drive, the ability to still push through. It is not necessarily going to, I think other people worry, they're like, oh, my tendons, it makes my tendons very dry. Some of that might be the fluid that comes out. Honestly, most of it is probably because when it's generally used when you're dry already, right? Your estrogen's low. Aldosterone is low. You're going to be dry. It's the Winistrol is not causing that. Technically, Winistrol causes collagen 3 production, like all anabolic steroids. So it's not necessarily driving tendon ruptures or anything. Not to say those things can't happen. That's a whole nother conversation of why those things occur, but that's not really a risk that we're worried about. You're not going setting records in the gym.
Exactly. I mean, I was going to say it's negligible at that point. You're just training for enough stimulus at that point. Number one. Number two, if you're taking something in the form of, like, say, a Superdrol or Anadrol for 3 weeks, I mean, we're talking about different types of toxicity that could possibly happen compared to Winistrol the last 2 weeks being at, or even 10 days being at a higher dosage, where you literally will see a difference in the physique, hardness, and dryness each and every day. And then if, you're getting dried out tendons and ligaments, like you said, I mean, that's more estrogenic from what I've seen anecdotally, dropping down and just being completely fat-free. And systemically, you are urinating more, obviously creating more dryness. But, obviously, if it depletes any type of cartilage or collagen, you can supplement with collagen or shark cartilage. I mean, there's things that you can do to help, create a better, internal environment. But really, again, guys, we're talking about 10 to 12 days, 3 weeks at the most. Yeah, I mean, there's really not much that's going to happen. And I'm speaking from thousands of preps. Again, we're not advocating for a specific dosage. We're just saying that a lot of new techniques of people trying to reinvent the wheel, there's a reason why a lot of it doesn't seem to be working. So want to always try to stick with what's tried, tested, and proven over the years. And number one is getting totally fat free. And then also number two is going to be utilization. If you are using performance enhancers, noting how to do them correctly, the timeline of them, the onset time, the peaks time, the half-life of it, when to pull it, what's causing inflammation that doesn't even need to be in. We talked about, Trenbolone, maybe pulling that early if it's needed, because not always something needed for everybody. Some people get a really bad response in terms of progesterone going up, converting into prolactin. And then people want to obviously supplement with a cabergoline or pramipexole, which is extremely hard on the heart. So I mean, there's better ways to go about it. So that's what me and Kurt are here to do. And we're here to show you that there's a smarter way to approach contest prep, utilization of supplementation, and all these things in between, man. So
So with prolactin, the standard, so in men, there's really 3 reasons why it would ever be elevated. So it's the simplest one is when estrogen goes up. So during prep, you should not be seeing your estrogen going up. Trenbolone can cross detect in cheaper methods of labs as estrogen. So you might think your estrogen is going up if you do, if you don't do
I've seen it,
expensive labs, but that's not actually the case, just cross detecting. The other reason is when thyroid function goes down. So one of the things that Trenbolone acetate can do is it can lower T3 output. It doesn't always happen to every person, but it can do that, and that can make prolactin go up as well.
I've seen that as well.
The third reason is what you call pituitary adenoma, which is a non-cancerous tumor, basically, that's pushing on the pituitary. That's a whole nother situation and requires surgery generally, or at least hardcore medicine. Cabergoline is not the right answer there. I would manage the problem. What is causing the issue? Fix that first. Don't just add toxic things like cabergoline on top of it. Right, to manage. To me, that's not the right answer. I would fix either the estrogen issue or the thyroid issue first.
Absolutely, 100%. So we touched real quick, because we are a little pressed for time, guys, today. So we touched real quick on kind of the final week, which we can dive deeper. If you guys have questions, leave them in the comments. We'll touch on them. Let's talk about post-show. Show's over. You just got off stage. You texted your coach. It's time to rehydrate. And you want to go out to eat with your family or friends or loved ones, obviously. And of course, people will eat quite a bit of sodium and drink quite a bit of fluid, and they're super, super vascular because they have an acute blood pressure increase that caused a lot of vasodilation. And they'll take a picture at the hotel in perfect lighting and say, oh man, if I only look like this. And of course, it's not nearly as dry or separated. So just remember, guys, just because you're veiny does not mean you have the right look on stage. Get that out of your head. So they wake up the next morning, or even that night, Kurt, what would you have them do that night? They want to get back to baseline. It's time to get ready for a progression season, rebound.
Okay. So no other show for now.
We'll touch on both scenarios real quick.
The first one, no other show. They're just, it's time for health.
Yep.
I would typically have them. So we'll go back to esters for a second. So typically, like we've been doing for 20 years, you switch at 6 or 8 weeks out to short esters. And the reason being there is because you can pull or manipulate the doses really fast. If you need to pull trend, you need to pull test, it can be done really quickly and efficiently, and it's predictable, versus if you're using tesipinate going into a show, who the heck knows when it's coming out. So assuming you switched, there should be really no testosterone left in the person at that point. I would typically have them use something, just propionate, just suspension, some short acting, even an amphate, cypionate to some degree still, even though they're long esters, they still have a short peak time. So that you can still use them if you want, depending on what you're going into. If you're not going into a show, it's probably safe to try something like that. You just want to get the body back to health. So I would typically have them use whatever their typical TRT dose is. Perhaps it's a slight, like if their TRT dose, again, I hate to talk about numbers. Their TRT dose is 200 milligrams. Maybe they do the all 200 milligrams initially just to get it back so they feel good.
Agreed.
And then, let them enjoy one sane meal, within reason, not to harm themselves, blow their gut out. And they go right back into probably where they were a couple weeks out from the diet. And then slowly titrate the food back up to let the body adjust.
Agreed.
I would not introduce, unless someone literally had to immediately make massive changes because they had something else coming up in 2 months. I wouldn't typically introduce a bunch of anabolics, tons of food. The body is very stressed at that point. Health is not really great. You're going to do nothing but probably gain a ton of fat.
Agreed.
Rebound that you see a lot of times is when thyroid stuff is used. If thyroid medicine's pulled, then all of a sudden they gain a bunch of muscle back. That's not necessarily a rebound. That's you're actually watching the body normalize and not be catabolic anymore.
So what I try to do in that type of scenario is I would do the same thing with testosterone, Kurt. And then with any type of thyroid or beta-3, clenbuterol, anything like that, I'll always taper it down slowly. I think the biggest mistake people make is they do a 180 from what they were doing, right? So they basically stop all fat burners, all thyroid immediately. They start eating, 2,000 calories above baseline, and then their cardio goes to almost next to nothing. And then on top of that, they're snacking because ghrelin is just so high, and they're bored, so there's no goal, for another year or so. So they just, the hunger is just out of control. It's insatiable. They just eat. And before you know it, you're 25 pounds heavier in 2 weeks, and you've literally ruined the entire process. Now we have to reverse you. We have to recomposition, do everything basically backwards, right? So I always tell my guys, listen, if you want to win and you want to take this seriously, then we have to be methodical about our approach. Go have a free meal, go enjoy maybe even a breakfast the next morning. After that, we got to get the cardio back in. We got to get the body going. I also try to reset adrenals to an extent because people have fried themselves from stimulant usage. So I really try to focus on micronutrient intake, and iodine, selenium. I'll even add in copper, ashwagandha, again, adaptogens to really kind of reset the body, L-theanine, just to really calm down the nervous system as well. And really start to slowly titrate the food up, right? So it's a slow titration up. Like you said, you go back to maybe what you were eating 3 weeks prior to the show, and then you just slowly titrate up. And then you utilize foods that really help with satiety. So that could be in the form of more, fibrous vegetables, fiber from fruit, things that are going to be more, heavy on the satiety. So maybe even more roughage, greens, like I said. People will say, well, fats are more satiating. Not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. You could add in oils and avocado and still be starving. And when you do that, your caloric intake just gets too high too quick, and I want to focus on performance, and performance is normally going to come in the form of carbohydrate.
Yes.
And protein can even be moderate at that point. I mean, I don't see the need to start going up to, 1.5 to 2.5 grams per pound of lean body mass. It's kind of irrelevant at that point. You're going to grow at that point. Insulin sensitivity is so high if you did everything correctly post-show, and the body's ready to, we've used this term, it's a sponge, essentially. Now, how you approach the next 6 to 8 weeks, your coach can lay it out for you. But if you don't have that mental resiliency we talked about, you will falter, you will give into the hunger cues, and it's going to be a big problem. So for you guys that want to improve season to season, understand that right after that show, after you enjoy a little bit of food, it's time to get back to work. And that's kind of the mindset.
Yeah. And you and I both don't really refer to it as, I probably call it off season prior, but it's not something I typically call an off season, because you're never really off, right? Yeah. It's progress. Yeah. I mean, I would do the same stuff. I don't think it's about pushing anything. Yeah, and fat has a longer transit time in the stomach, but it's not, leptin doesn't respond to it. Leptin responds to protein, fiber, and carbohydrates that turn to glucose. So you will be much more full if you ate some rice or something similar to that versus you would if you ate a tablespoon of peanut butter. It's why you can eat a whole jar of peanut butter in one sitting easily if given the opportunity, and you don't want to do that ever.
Yeah, and I actually, real quick to touch on the foods and stuff, what I'll do for fats, right off the bat, I'll increase their fish oil intake, the highest DHA that we can for cognitive function. It puts people in a better mood, obviously, heart health, cardiovascular health, lipid profile. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to get, really increased to a positive extent from a really high quality, high DHA based fish oil. So I'll go to 12 to 14 grams sometimes with people, as opposed to them eating, again, avocados, which are very nutritionally dense, by the way. Not saying they're not, but the biggest, I think we would both agree on this, the biggest focus post show is to get someone back feeling good from a neurological standpoint, physiological standpoint, hormonal standpoint. They want to train, motivation is there, dopamine is high, motivation's high, they're ready to get to work. But I will say, and we can leave it at this, and I'll let you finish, Kurt. I will say that after a show, and it's something I've noticed over 15, 20 years of coaching so many athletes, the motivation is extremely high for the majority of people. I mean, they're ready. I mean, whatever it takes for a week or two, because that is almost like the post-show rebound of dopamine. They felt that adrenaline rush. They felt what it was like to be on stage. But once they get into the monotonous day-to-day activity, that will fall off 2 to 3 weeks later. And the majority of guys that aren't strong mentally start missing meals, and then meals turn into missing training sessions. And then it turns into 2 to 3 months of cascading into doing nothing. And then you basically lost any progression you could have made in a progression season, and you've lost all the ability to truly improve. So remember, we are process driven as athletes. We are not motivation driven, because motivation is a feeling that is fickle. It will come and go. And it really relies on the dopaminergic system, which dopamine will change a lot throughout the day,
to it, and
day to day. Do not count on motivation. Count on doing things that you need to do when you don't feel like doing them.
Yep. And for long periods of time.
Yes. Very.
I had a discussion with someone at the gym today. I was just my head just wasn't in there, but I did the same stuff I always do. You don't stop, you don't miss, you keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with that, the other difference between, just to touch on, so like the avocados are totally healthy. There's nothing wrong with them at all. The fat that's in them, the monounsaturated fat that's in avocados, are not essential fatty acids. Your body can actually produce those. Yeah. And from a fat storage point of view, in order, your body will least likely store polyunsaturated fat like fish oil. It's generally used for cell membranes and your brain. Saturated fat actually comes in second as storage, and then mono is actually the highest ability to store, which is kind of contrary to what most people would think. So you're more likely to store something like olive oil as body fat than you would as something, necessarily like grass-fed butter. But that, again, that doesn't mean that you need, that doesn't mean any of these are right or wrong to eat. It just,
yeah.
your body works.
I always opt out too for like the organic free range whole egg, just from the choline source that you get from it too. So again, yeah, I mean, that's phenomenal, you know, pinpointing the reasons why we would use what we would use, right? Remember, everything we try to do is methodical and thoroughly laid out. We don't just throw in, you know, oils to throw in oils or fats to throw in fat, or tell you to go eat a ribeye steak just because it, you know, will hold you over and, you know, cause more satiety. Again, we're still trying to drive a aesthetic physique all year round. We're still trying to make improvements. And me and Kurt, I think, are on the same page when it comes to the majority of guys. We are trying to get you performance driven through carbohydrates as one of the main drivers. And we know, of course, protein is needed to an extent, not as much as people think is needed. And then, of course, dietary fats is just, for me, is just enough to balance off hormones for performance, for, you know, blood work. Outside of that, man, I don't get too high on the fats, because then we have to pull from somewhere else. And I certainly don't want to pull from carbohydrates.
No, I'm with you. And I think that that's most successful bodybuilders realize that. I think a lot of amateur guys or lifestyle guys don't realize that until they work with one of us, that that's really something that we're really just doing trace fats. I really have to teach people, especially in this country, you have to teach people how to eat less fat. It's in everything.
Everything.
Right. And they need to count it all.
Everything. Absolutely. Yep. 100%. You got anything else, Kurt?
No, I think that's it for now. I mean, if people have questions about more specific peak week stuff, you know, perhaps we could touch on it, you know, the sodium and the potassium and things like that, possibly using liquor or aldactone or some of the specifics. I think you and I both probably want to avoid very specific advice, though. It's risky to give. And it's not always the right answer for everyone. It's so individual. And even within a person, I'm sure you see it all the time. With my own body as well, I might respond totally different to something 1 year versus another.
100%. So I think the body
is no set way to, you know, peak something.
The human anatomy and body is something that we're still learning, still understanding. Kurt tried to, I don't know if it got posted up last week, but it was a picture of the body's metabolism. It's a phenomenal phenomenon. Your body can change year to year. What you did the year prior, you can have notes and it's good data, but you may not be able to do that the next year. It's just unbelievable what happened. So we'll touch on that, guys. Leave comments, subscribe to Kurt, hit the bell notification. We're going to keep doing this every single week. Just continue to deep dive. If there's another topic you want us to cover as a cohesive team, let us know. We are here for you guys. We're here to serve you guys and to put out phenomenal information every single week. Kurt, thank you so much for having me on again on your platform. Look forward to the next time, man.
Absolutely. Take care, guys. Thank you.